We gotta approve 2025 too, Bob.
Yeah.
Got that.
You're good to go.
Lot of executive session. Second.
All in favor? Okay, let's call this regular meeting to order. This time, please join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You want a motion on film?
Yes, we'll do that first. We can make a motion on Philbrook Fund.
Yep, the motion is $2,395 for 2025-2.
All in favor? Oh, we got a second. Second. All in favor? Opposed, abstained, abstained. 301. And well, one absent, we got Adams absent. Adjustments to the agenda. We do have an adjustment. I'm going to discuss an old business. The Sylvania names, Sylvania Park names.
We do, and we also have a, actually a recreation event in partnership that Michael's been working on
For
the Madam, it's the Madamic,
Voices of the.
Voices of the Madamic.
that can be in a new business.
Yes. We're excited about
Any others?
Mark Salt.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, Mark. And we're gonna have, under new business, we're gonna discuss public hearing for a dangerous building. That'll be 10.3. Any others? Okay. Public hearings right now, none. Presentations. Like Brian's here to talk about a little update from the VOA.
I don't have a presentation.
Well-
I'm here.
Just an update on where everything's going up on the hill.
So this is Brian Seitz from Volunteers of America.
Thank you. Save me the having to say that myself. Yeah, so it's been a while since I've been here for an update, and a lot of stuff has kind of happened in the background. And I'm going to work off the assumption that folks are just wanting an update on what's has happened, what is our strategy going forward, and that kind of thing.
The future.
Yeah.
Is it gonna get under construction?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'll just be upfront. I don't have an answer for that today. What we have done in the past year is, in the past 2 years, obviously we, last year about this time, we were in the midst of, the demo and abatement of, the site. That went off, as well as could be expected and under budget. So we were really happy about that. Thanks again to Max and to the town for working with us through the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant Funds, to make that happen. After that, we were at a point where we could start filing for different funding streams, and there was two that we targeted in 2024. The first one was the low-income housing tax credit. There's two different flavors of what they call LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit, the 4% and the 9%. Last year, Waldeboro was including what they call a boost, which gave us a little extra subsidy funding towards the project. So we went after the 4%. We did not get the 4%. It scored well. We had we had a misunderstanding with the review team as to how many of the 36 units are ADA accessible. All of them. The short answer, all of them are. But for some reason, they couldn't discern that from our application. So we lost some points there. We lost some points around the transportation piece. I mean, there's LC Fish, and I forget the other group, the CAP group that Waldo CAP, that provides different type of transportation. They found some deficiencies there. We've since corrected those issues for a future funding round, if necessary. So we unfortunately did not get that piece. Just to kind of give you an idea, so everyone understands the scope of this project and how it's changed over the years. I think that when we first started talking to you guys in 22-ish, when we had some idea of what we thought the project was going to be, somewhere between $8 and $9 million. That LIHTC application that we put in was for 12.7 million. So that gives you a kind of the scope of the creep with inflation that we're seeing on the construction side. We also put in last summer a HUD, what they call a HUD 202 application. This HUD 202 is both a capital funding for construction as well as ongoing subsidy for rents on the property. We own a lot of those types of properties across the state. We own one over in Loudon, New Hampshire as well. We own and operate those. We prefer the 202 funding because it's very, very stable. Again, it provides capital and that ongoing rental assistance. So that it's a great funding stream for us. Unfortunately, we did not get awarded that. Again, on a technicality, and it had something to do with our environmental review that we submitted. So we spent quite a deal of time. We hired an outside firm to actually put that in because it is a highly technical application. And it's one that hasn't been presented since 2010. This is the first real round that had any funding behind it. And the same firm that had done an earlier HUD application, the HUD 811 for a group home, we successfully got that last year, but we did not get the 202, unfortunately. So what does that mean going forward? And just to give you an idea, just that little 6-month window between we applied for the 4% and the 202, the cost was just over $13 million when we applied for the 202. So, we're trying to keep up with the inflation as we go, as we're chasing these dollars. So what are we doing going forward? So we, there's, like I said, there's a couple different options for the low-income housing tax credits. There's the 9% round, which comes out July-ish through Maine Housing. There will be a later 4% round later in the year, maybe first part of 2026 that we're targeting to go for. We have talked with several different entities to help us try to squeeze out as many points as possible. The scoring for a 9% versus a 4% are fairly different. One, the 9% is more based on need. So it's really more like kind of location based. So you'll see a lot of projects that tend to be selected in like, South Portland, York County, those types of areas where there's larger populations. Not to say that they don't do smaller projects, but it's harder for a town like Waldoboro to score well in the 9% because Waldoboro is just not on their needs list through Maine Housing. Which you guys are welcome to make calls to Maine Housing and get that on the list because you should be on there. The 4% is a little different because that's really based less on, it's based on need, but it really focuses more on project preparedness where we feel like that's where we will excel. So between now and those two funding streams coming out, we don't anticipate a 202 with everything that's going on at the federal government right now. We don't expect another 202 round this year, maybe never. So that's very unfortunate, but it's just how things roll. We're doing a couple different things. One, we're going after $500,000 in funding for a CDBG housing grant, which this project qualifies for up to $500,000. This summer, I'll be putting in. And these are all secondary and tertiary funding streams, right? But it helps with the application. We'll be putting in an affordable housing program grant through the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston. That would give us up to another $1.25 million in funding. We also have already awarded and accepted the $108,000 that we had gotten ARPA funds through the Lincoln County ARPA. So we're just kind of building that secondary funding piece. So that when we go after these, the 4% and the 9% that we have stuff in the tank.
4% and 9%, they mean nothing.
Low-income housing tax credit applications. So these are kind of like a public-private partnership where you have private investors who they invest money into the project and get a tax credit on the other side. For nonprofits like ourselves, we go after that funding as a source of development funds. So on one side, you know, the private investors get the tax credit. On the other side, we get the development dollars for a project. And that's kind of how that works.
Still kind of opaque.
It's opaque to everyone who deals with them. So we can do a whole nother discussion on what LIHTC is. I am by no means an expert. But these are the funding streams that we have to deal with for these larger projects. So we have low income housing tax credit, 2 flavors, 9% and 4%. And the HUD 202. Someone had mentioned, and I will mention here, the USDA Rural Development Program. That program is, we just took over an older rural development program in Thomaston. It's two separate sites, 12 and 18 units. It's workforce housing. It's not senior housing, but it's a rural development project. Rural development does put out money on occasion. They haven't put out any money since 23. And those dollars tend to be just loans. So those projects are a little trickier. Yes, sir.
Is there a moratorium on the money you've already gotten? Could it go away if we don't get this other stuff done in time?
The only money that has a moratorium is the $108,000 in ARPA funds, and we can apply that towards any of the technical stuff that we've already put out there. And just so everyone is aware, VOA is an organization, and not counting my time and the time that it takes me to put together applications. I mean, we're $185,000 in. We're not like a regular development firm, right? So we can't just go out into the public and say, hey, we have these 550 units of housing that we own. We can't use those as equity towards any project, right? Every time I start a new application, it's like I'm starting from zero. The only equity I have is our experience in ownership, our experience in property management, and our experience in services, if that's part of the application that I'm applying for. So I'm basically starting from zero every single time.
When do you throw up your hands in despair?
I don't. I mean, honestly, if you kind of roll back the clock, we've been working on this project for a while, right? So I think we started 2020. We had an option agreement in the next year. We went through 3 referendum votes, and really from that 3rd referendum vote is really when I start the clock. So that was like late 22, I think. So we're like 3 years, not even quite 3 years in. Just for a point of reference, we have a project in Chelsea, Maine, that is specifically for homeless veterans. It's 21 units of and they're called Cabin in the Woods. They're just literally like small 1 and 2 bedroom cabins that sit right on the Togus campus. It took us 7 years to get that funded. Sometimes it happens. And we're not looking, and I'll be honest, we're not looking at a very favorable environment right now. Since we started this project in 2020, we had this influx of cash that came through around COVID. All that cash is kind of flushed through the system, including like ARPA funds and any extraneous funds that went through Maine Housing for these projects. That money is flushed through the system. And I think everyone is well aware of what's happening in DC. We don't anticipate any more funds coming through HUD. We don't even expect any more what they call congressional directed spending, which is a very nice name for earmarks. We don't anticipate any of that money being available to projects like this. So we have an abundance of pent up projects in the pipeline, not just for us, but for all like affordable housing developers, and a limited number of funding streams coming through. Which is why, as we anticipate, applying for these new LIHTC streams, that we are making sure that we maximize all the points that were available to us. That was a lot. I'm sorry. That was a lot. I know I say a lot of acronyms, so I'm happy to peel any of that back for you.
The 4% and 9%, that represents the amount of tax credit that the developer gets for funding the project?
Not really. 4% and 9%, and this is a question that I'm not qualified to answer. It has something to do with the investors and the amount of credit they get towards a particular project for the money that they put into the project. That's the best I know how to answer it.
It's a tax shelter.
Yeah,
Yeah, so these are tax shelters for
Basically, yes.
people who are rich, looking for a place to
Taxable
park their
use.
Put
money.
some money, yeah,
right.
makes sense.
So I can tell you a few other things that, you know, we're gonna be working on, in conjunction with you. Max has some of this stuff already in process, unless I've said too much already. Okay. So, not getting much more into the weeds around, around the LIHTC stuff. You know, one of the most important things for scoring either on the 4% or 9% is making sure that the site is specifically designated for development by the municipality. I've been working with Max a little bit in the background to talk about a community revitalization plan and making sure this site is part of your community revitalization plan. That will give us some unique points within those applications to help that. You know, like I said, we've addressed the accessibility counts that the accessibility units counts that we came up short on, and the 4% last year. And you know, we're applying for all the secondary funding we can. And those are really the big things. The only other thing that I have not spoken with Max about, and I've been talking with some folks just in this past week, is we have an agreement with you, with the town. We have a pilot payment in lieu of taxes for the site once it's up and running. The state is recommending that we convert that pilot to some sort of TIF. So it would that would take a little bit of like legal wrangling. So we just need to have a broader discussion about that. But I only bring it up here because in a couple of weeks I was going to bring it to you anyway. I just don't have the details yet. And then that's really it. You know, we were just making sure all I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
You haven't given up on us.
No, as long as you guys haven't given up on me. I mean, we put a lot of time and effort, and you know, like I said, we've like put our money where our mouth is. Like we've taken on this risk because we believe in this project, and it's not going anywhere. I just ask for people's patience. I don't have any control over what funding and when it comes out.
Brian, who's your competition on some of these funds you're looking at down the
Oh,
road?
God, Avesta Housing, Developers Collaborative, any of the housing authorities. And see, what's that? Habitat does more like home ownership stuff, so they don't really, so we're more rental, long-term rentals. So, you know, and we're at a disadvantage with some of these groups too. So if you're a housing authority, you're sitting on a pile, you know, you have access to, project-based vouchers, which are basically rental assistance vouchers that you can put into an application. We don't have that. You know, we knew that was always going to be a struggle, which is why we tended to want the 202 funds to work out, because that would have given us the project-based vouchers that we needed. Not saying that it can't operate without them, but it's just more stable for the residents long term.
Any other questions?
I thought I was gonna go for 1 year without having to touch the 1 year.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah,
Appreciate your
I'm
update.
sorry. I wish I had better news, but like I said, you know, we're working this problem. We talk about it constantly. So
I mean, we've had a few residents from the neighborhood up there ask us, and
yeah.
I
And
drove by there today, and I mean, it's presentable now, and
And we're getting-
a ratty building on both sides of the road, and
yeah, and we're getting calls all the time about when it's going to be open, and we just keep telling people the same thing. You know, it'll be once we get funded. You know, the time clock will start, and we'll let people know. But until we get funding,
So if we had somebody who had a lot of money walk in here and say they wanted to give money to a housing project, I think we should give them your number.
yes. Make sure that tell them it is now 13.5 million, and make sure there's enough zeros on the check. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
thanks, Brian.
I know you have a long ride, so don't feel obligated to stay.
I'm gonna listen for a little bit, 'cause I'm always curious.
What's going on?
former select board member, so he
Oh.
was
Oh,
in another community.
citizen comments. Any citizen comments? No? Select board comments. Mike?
Not on.
I would just point out that we are in the weeds of the budget season here in this town, probably every town. So there's nobody, it doesn't look like there's anybody on tonight, but if you're watching this recording and you have some feedback, please bring it up to our attention.
Bob?
Me? I just have a couple of things. We attended I call it a webinar, I guess, yesterday. Ruben was there too, with Fidium. I think we're gonna do one of these every month now. And one of the questions we had that we're concerned about is the same question that Brian just talked about. Is whether or not all the grant funding has taken place, and it has. So there's absolutely no financial issue associated with the project. And they've even pointed out that we expect to have our connection done in June where we are. And they figure they'll have everything done by sometime in August. And of course, they don't want to be held to that because you know what could happen if there's a big storm or something crazy goes on then. But it was a very, very encouraging meeting. And next month, when they have their next meeting, I encourage you to sign up for it and listen in. It's a good group and they're very informative when they talk. And then one of the residents asked me to mention geese on Ogunquit Beach. Apparently, there was this huge influx of geese that died of the avian flu. So if you have a lot of geese coming into your pond or river near you
My yard.
or your yard and they're dead, very likely they died because of avian flu. Don't pick them up. Please call animal control and let them take care of it. This person was very concerned. about
Animal control doesn't deal with
Thank you.
wildlife.
Dead.
Thank you. Yeah. Who should they call?
Game warden
I
probably.
believe it's the game.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. That's all I had.
Really don't have a whole lot. Just like Becky said, we're working on our budget right now for the town, but also the RSU is working on theirs at the same time, so I encourage folks out there and in the world of internet to take a look at, not only our budget meetings, but the RSU's budget meetings, because eventually they're gonna have to come together.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
So, again, it is budget time. It's the most wonderful time of the year,
In your words.
in my words. So that's been going, I think, actually swimmingly. I think that everybody has a lot of good questions and we have one person who's joined who we haven't seen before, who decided to come out and participate, well, at least listen to the budget committee meetings, and I hope we didn't scare him away. Because we're like,
Oh,
"Oh,
the young fella?
yes, Ben, yes,
Hunter.
yes. So I was, we always get very excited when we see new faces. We really do. So I was very encouraged by that. I don't think we've mentioned, but engine 4 has returned with a new motor. It needs its break-in period. So that was a big fix. One of our motors in our engine went, and Public Works was able to replace that. So that's a kind of big news since the last time we met. And I also wanted to update everybody on the long-standing legal issue that we had with the property on Route 1. I forget the exact address on 3425 Route 1. That was construction that happened on the property without a permit. It was a lengthy 2-year issue. We took that property owner to court. And as of last week, it finally is resolved. It could have been resolved a lot earlier. The total check that the town received was $64,163.76. And that covered our around $28,000 worth of legal fees. And the rest of that was fines because of non-compliance. So those fines add up. And they were imposed by the judge for non-compliance. So the rest of that was all based on fines of $100 and or $200 a day until the violation was actually resolved. So I just wanted to put that out there. So it is something that we don't like to do when we have to make decisions, when select board has to make a decision to take something to court, but it does happen. And like I said, it was $64,163.76.
What happens to the site?
It's been sold.
Sold again.
It's been sold and a new business is going in there. So anyway, the only thing I would mention with that is we may want to put some of that in reserve. Because we get more and more of these issues popping up. So we may want to take some of that, but that's a discussion for the budget committee after the budget's over, and talk about maybe another reserve account for such matters. That's all I have.
Okay. We'll get a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Nothing. 4 and absent. New business. 10.1 tax required property policy.
I move we table this until our next meeting.
Second.
Moving second, any discussion? All in favor? Table it. 10.2, we're gonna have a talk about the voice of the Madamic. Michael?
Thank you. So I'm here to ask for the town's partnership on a new initiative called Voices of the Madamic, which is our working name. And it is has been developed so far by various residents of Waldoboro and other nearby community members. Janet McMahon, ecologist, Ken Stevenson, who works for the Island Institute and lives on Gross Neck, Morgan Price of Madamic Conservancy, Mia Branco, who's the education director at the Waldo, myself, Michael Amico, for the record, and Heather Leslie, who is a marine biologist who works on the Damariscotta River. We all came together, maybe 6+ months ago, and wanted to think about ways to increase access and awareness to the river, and of the river, because we know that many people have different relationships with the river depending on whether they're here all year round, whether they're just summer residents, whether they make a living on the river, or whether they kayak and otherwise enjoy a recreational activity on the river. Whether they see the river on the road or don't see the river because they live elsewhere in Waldoboro or their view is blocked by trees. The river has an extremely complex and central relationship importance to Waldoboro's history. And so we thought, are there ways, or one way, to begin to raise awareness of all these different ways that the river is experienced, lived, and relied upon in the community today. And by doing so, bring together groups of people who normally would not hang out with each other or know about each other. Many people, I think, don't even know how much of a working waterfront parts of the Madamic currently are. And so there's a lot of opportunity and that we wanted to explore in terms of celebrating the river, but also take on some of the issues that have arisen around the river, its use, its development, its biology. We thought, as we were staring at the map of the Madamic, and I was thinking about the walking tours that I started to give around Waldoboro, I was thinking, wait a minute, what if we did a tour of the river So essentially a tour that interweaves history, economy, and biology, ecology. Through 3 or 4 stops along the river. And that you would conduct a number of boats, kayaks, would be led to each stop, and there would be a speaker either at the stop or with you on the boats who would speak about these different components, economy, ecology, and history. And you would start, and this is our working premise for this summer, at the Dutch Neck boat launch, and we would end at the Pine Street Landing. This is in development. There's also a first part that's happening in May, and that is Morgan and Janet working with 2 art classes at Madomic Valley High School, 2 art teachers, and they're going to take a field trip and visit various sites along the watershed. So they're actually going to start north of the head of tide and work down. And they're going to be thinking about species and land formation, but also gathering clay in order to create art projects back in school. And they're also interweaving drawing and photography on that trip. So that's about students understanding better their own personal relationship and connection to the river. This paddle that we've been planning for July would be an open community event for anyone and everyone, and we want to make it as accessible as possible. And then maybe in the fall, we have a culminating event that brings together experiences from part 1 and part 2, and uses photography and storytelling for people to talk more about maybe their experience in these events or their relationship with the river. Ideally, we would like to have 1 or 2 students who participate in all 3 events across the year. As we're developing this, we want community partners, and we want the town to play a central role in helping us realize this, because I think that it's actually beneficial to the community on so many levels. And this is only the first year. So we're thinking about how can this year be an exploratory year of figuring out what people are responding to, trying different ways of experiencing the river. I mean, that's going to be a really experimental theatrical kind of thing that we're going to develop on the river. Could become, one of the ideas is a more immersive theatrical experience next year. So that like you would go to a spot on the river and all of a sudden like people would pop out of the woods and things would happen. There's so much opportunity here. And I spoke to Julie and asked whether the town would want to partner on this. So I'm here to ask the select board's basically approval of the beginning of that partnership. And we talked about how we can directly involve the recreation department.
I think it would be a great program under the recreation department.
Yep.
And which would be great, because that would allow us to think about it now in a new way, an additional way. We could,
Our rec director grew up on the river.
yeah, exactly. And we, right.
Oh, he's Waldo, actually.
And we want to involve like as many different types of, again, interactions with the river that people have had over time. So that's where we are now. And
So the paddle could be like, if you have your own kayak, you could join in with.
yeah, we're just trying to figure out like how many people we could take in a group to make it a cohesive experience, you know? So right now, our budget for the paddle, which is I think July 19th, tentatively a Saturday, is like under $2,000. And we would maybe rent 10 tandem kayaks from Maine Kayak, and they would be like, you know, ones with rudders in them to make it easy to steer, but then also allow people to bring their own kayak. But we thought, well, we'd have to limit that number. Like, what if 40 people showed up, which would be great, but now maybe we can use a pre-registration system and figure out a month or 2 in advance if there's enough interest that we could do 2. You know what I'm saying? It's all in flux.
So that's perfect for the recreation, because we have that system that we.
Right, that came up in the budget meeting.
Don't motorize.
So, and there will be motorized boats also, because again, we
Yeah.
wanted to make it as accessible as possible. So people who cannot paddle whether it's a family, older person or a younger person, they would go on the motor boat. So we're in talks and with whoever, about who would be present.
More people than you think.
Oh, I do too.
Oh, you say,
yeah.
just, once you open it up, you show up in the boats and you're gonna have a lot of people there.
Yeah, right. So then it's like, how are people heard? A megaphone, and we're just gonna begin to send.
The
So
safety side of it.
Tentatively, we wanted, like I say, Dutch Neck and then paddle across the bay and go to a site on the far side of the bay, which is mostly private property. So we need to work with landowners and ask whether we can pull up to their dock. And then maybe someone would be standing at the dock to talk about the history of that particular site and what it tells us about Waldoboro. Then we would move northwest and maybe stop in the center of the bay and have another conversation about the ecology or the biology in the center. And then tentatively go to Meeting House Cove as we make our way north. And there talk about the working waterfront and the economy. Interweaving all these themes throughout, I'm gonna have to figure out how to construct this, and then end up at the town landing where we'll have, videos asking people for feedback and, have some refreshments and things like that.
Do it on the incoming tide because.
Yes, we've already looked at the tide charts, and we're gonna have to have a rain date, and there was a long discussion about how we would time it with the tide, not only because we need water, but different wildlife is visible at different levels of the tide. And so we were like, well, coming up towards the town landing, you actually don't want so much water because the flats are more visible, and there's all these birds that come out in that condition. So it's really interesting to think about how much the experience fluctuates based on the tides. And basically, though, how much one's encounter with Waldoboro changes when you approach it by water versus land. And that's sort of the initial impetus of this whole project.
Marcus was excited about this when I mentioned it.
I move we support this effort. I think it's really cool. And that we consider as a possible source of funding rec department funds that might be available. I'm not naming an amount. I'm just saying funds that might be available. Then we look at that down the road.
Would most of the funding be coming from volunteers?
Well, all of the volunteers, we're gonna just, basically offer their services as in kind. The only cost was mainly the boats.
Rentals, yes.
So that's when I started looking into applying for grants. The issue is that we're just a random group of residents. And even if we had the town as a fiscal sponsor, a lot of grants won't award, a random group of people, even if they're fiscally sponsored by another entity. So we were thinking, okay, we could probably raise
The fundraising.
the money because it's not that high this year, and then think about this whole year as a kind of planning for next year, where then we could actually apply for a larger grant based on how well we do this year. So I think that, help from the town would be wonderful, but we don't need to rely on it. We're going to make this happen no matter what, whether it's by donations or some other way.
I boat on the river some, not as much as I used to. A few more responsibilities. Certainly, you definitely picked the right route going from Dutch Neck up to the middle of town because I've gone through the Narrows at between tides, and it's I wouldn't want to be in a canoe or a kayak on it. But that said, south of there is some of the most interesting parts of the river.
I know.
I was wondering whether somebody might want to get in my boat and venture a little further out.
Like a motorboat?
Motorboat,
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much potential for this. You could do tours elsewhere, I just think we need to just get people on the river and see how they're responding and, what kind of information we could give in that setting. It's a really interesting, creative challenge.
I was thinking of volunteering my services
Okay,
of the boat
okay.
is sort of safety, you know, somebody
Yes.
goes in the water.
Yes, we had planned to have at least 2 safety boats and 1 motorboat just for people attending. But I will keep you in the loop in terms of deciding all that. Thank you.
Is there a second to supporting? Any more discussion? Isaac. 60, almost 60 years on this river and I love it. So
Yeah, and it's, you know, I mean, it's so important just to like
grew up on it. lived
have
on it,
an,
worked
have the
on it.
means, right, to express that feeling and have other people share in it. There's not opportunity to do that, you know, like you have your experience and I want you to be able to share that with others and then share that, you know, their own, or just hear about it and be like, oh yeah, I need to go check out the river, you know? So thank you.
All in favor?
Great, thank you.
We look forward to seeing more information. Okay, 10.3. We have a notice of hearing for a dangerous building we have to discuss.
It's a hard act to follow, but I'll try. We have property out on Route 1 that has been in disrepair from a fire. And I've tried to work with a homeowner, the property owner. We've actually had a meeting in here. And we have had no movement on that whatsoever. So the next step in the process is to hold a public hearing. What you have before you is just the notice of public hearing that needs to go to the property owner. And the public hearing would be scheduled for the 25th, where at that point, evidence and so forth and rebuttal would be presented. So I just need your approval and signature on this form, and I can send that out in the certified mail.
I'd make the motion to have the public hearing on the 25th concerning that property on Atlantic Avenue. Atlantic Highway.
Second.
First, any more discussion?
Yeah, it was purchased in 2022, 2.5 years ago. Has the owner, does he have any plans for the building, or is he just?
When we had the office meeting, he had discussed the possibility of using the building. He had mentioned something about having somebody move in immediately, and I'm like, it's wide open, the windows are torn out of it, it's in major disrepair. I told him I welcome it if he wants to do something moving forward but the 2 options at this point are either the building needs to be torn down or it needs to be repaired and brought back up to code. And neither one has happened, so. I would much rather go through the voluntary route. That's always the easiest on everyone, but I don't think we haven't had anything so far.
All in favor? Opposed, none, absent, 1.
Thank you.
Old business, 11.1 sidewalk cleaning update.
So if you'll recall, at the last meeting, there were some questions about sidewalks here and how we could potentially handle them. And I just wanted to give you an update. I had sent out something to all select board, but it was asked at a public meeting. The question is, are municipalities in Maine legally required to maintain their sidewalks during the winter time? And the answer is generally speaking, yes. If a town way is required to maintain as opposed to a public is blocked or encumbered with snow, the way must be opened and made passable within a reasonable amount of time. There's no definition for a reasonable amount of time. The obligation to remove snow also extends to public sidewalks located within the legal limits or boundaries of a town way. But this duty does not apply to public sidewalks located outside of a town way. So like if it was in a park, you wouldn't have to. Despite the general obligation to keep public sidewalks clear of snow, municipalities are absolutely immune from liability or damages to any person on foot on account of snow or ice or slippery conditions on any sidewalk or crosswalk. So this blanket immunity for pedestrian accidents on snow or ice covered sidewalks is akin to the blanket immunity for motor vehicle accidents on snowy or icy public roads. These immunities simply recognize the realities of life in a Maine winter and the responsibility of every motorist and pedestrian to exercise due caution during wintry conditions. The select board does have the ability to authorize municipal officers to enact ordinances requiring owners or occupants of property to remove snow and ice from public sidewalks. So especially this happens in larger towns, we have that. So you have that ability if you wanted to impose it. But that would be entirely up to you. So what we do is we do the snow blowing of the sidewalks. We clear them once and that meets our requirement. If you wanted it, as people were saying, down to the bare concrete, we could, or sidewalk, you could require that for those people who property abuts that portion of the sidewalk. So that would be your answers. That would be the update.
Any questions, comments on that?
Maybe an agenda item for some meeting in the future.
Okay.
February next year.
Yeah. And the concern was that older people who cross or walk on sidewalks during snowstorms or after snowstorms especially, have hard times getting over the banks. Maybe you're using a cane, but wheelchairs certainly can't get through. So there are concerns, but the practical reality of life is when you've got a lot of snow, you're gonna have snowbanks. It takes a while to get rid of them and clean them up. And Julie's right. I mean, I grew up in a town in northern Minnesota and store owners cleaned their walks. It was just something they did because they knew if they didn't, people couldn't get in to buy the stuff they were selling. That makes sense, but that's why I think we could have a conversation around this at some point in the future, not now. Anyway.
Hey, 11.2, waste zero meeting date. Last couple budget meetings, we've had some pretty robust conversations about pay as you throw and the impact and the savings and all that, so the collaboration between the budget committee and the select board, we've all come to the understand that maybe it's time to have one more time a presentation to talk a little bit about pay as you throw and how it could help the town. Bob has a contact, someone that would come in here and we could possibly get her in here to do a presentation, not only to our residents that are interested, but also Cushing and Friendship, since they're partners with us in our transfer station. Bob, you got anything you want to add on that?
No, I mean, Taylor Millspaw is the woman that runs the program for Waste Zero. She's the director of municipal partnerships. I think she handles like 196 towns in her area. They do this nationwide. So she'd be available on the 25th of March if we want to schedule her. It gives us 2 weeks to notice it. And hopefully plenty of time for people to become aware that she's available to answer questions and talk about what they do in various communities. And so it's up to the pleasure of the board whether you'd like to have her come in or not.
I mean, it's quick.
I mean, we have a meeting on the 25th that we already have 2 public hearings on.
Public hearing, I just realized that too.
I just think you'll end up with a lot of interest. There's a topic.
I
that
think
you-
this is going to be big.
that
So I
you
think we
can
have to, first of all, we have to decide where we could potentially have it. So, I mean, it's either the school,
Gonna be capacity. plus.
we had a meeting
Mhm.
midday on a Friday, well, later on a Friday, a year ago about this very topic, and this room was packed to the gills. So I think if we're gonna have the conversation, it needs to be in a large venue and very well advertised.
So I guess what I would say is push it out to May at some point, see if she's available at some point in May. So that we have time to make sure all of the other municipalities affected are.
Would you want to have this, one of the schools or Miller School cafeteria? I don't know.
Where else will we, you got the Miller School, maybe we could get the Legion
For the Legion.
downstairs in the Legion.
Or the old VFW. maybe.
Or the Safe Harbor Church, they've got a big, and pastor there'd be more than welcome, I'm sure to, I won't speak for him, but he's often told me if we ever need anything. That's
There's
space.
also a great space in the Masons Hall. And they are eager to make community, make it available.
In the basement down there.
What?
Parking.
Parking could be an issue, yeah.
That's just my 2 cents, push it out a little bit, only for the
High school might let the.
reality of setting up a space and making.
Oh, yeah, the
sure
high
people
school,
there.
the high school would be good because that's also, you got Friendship and Cushing,
Mhm.
but we don't. You gotta remember, you're gonna have graduations and all that stuff coming up too, so it's coordination with them.
Okay.
But of course, it's something, it's gonna be a
So
week, it's
are
gonna be a
we-
weeknight.
Is everybody else in agreement with May? I know. How does anybody else feel about May?
I think sometime after March is a good idea. May is fine, but March is.
Okay.
So May 13th or May 27th?
Not that.
Well,
It's up
why
to
don't
us
we
schedule.
see what she's,
Well, I've got to give her a date. I mean, it's not fair to her to say, when can you come? And she says, I can come on a Wednesday or a Friday or a Thursday. I think it'd be nice to schedule it when we normally meet. People are used to our meeting times, and if there's something to hear about, they usually come.
Well, we also have to, the venue, the place that we're gonna be at.
Yeah, and that's what I need
Coordinate with
to,
Yeah.
that's what I need
So
to
why
tell
don't-
her, but
so why don't I figure out the space and their availability? And then we can plan around the space and their availability. Does that make sense?
it does.
Okay. I can do that. I can make that happen.
And once that's done, we'll advertise it and
Mhm.
push it. And
We have the Sylvania Park name too.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
I just didn't know. You added that.
11-3.
Old business, 11-3. Yep. Get it right here, Sylvania names.
Okay, so if you will recall, we had talked about park names several times now at the Sylvania committee meeting the other day. It was brought up that Colonial Park and Recreation, they'd like to not consider that name. They'd like that to be removed from consideration because of some of the connotation that colonial has with our Native American heritage. So there was some discussion about that. So I said, okay, I can take this to select board, but you're going to have to offer up a name that you would replace it with. So they replaced in the names that are Madomic River Community Park, Waldoboro Community Park, East Bank Park. They came up with one, and some people had new names, but I went with the list of the names that you guys were originally given. And I had no sway in this, but it was Dawnland Park. So, that would be the name that they would recommend replacing Colonial Park and Recreation with.
Donovan's Park?
Dawnland.
Dawnland. It's the native name for this area of the country. Because it's the first part of the, yes, okay.
World that gets sun, our
This
world that
side.
gets sun on this
What's
side.
the Abenaki name for land or dawn?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So with that said,
And
We-
the school we can get it done.
get it done. The school,
So-
give it to the school. That's my recommendation. Give those
We will
names
give it to
school.
the school. I had already
And-
given them the other 4 names, so we are good. And, Michael has graciously, offered that, especially for the older kids, potentially going and discussing all 4 names and the origins of them. So that if they do it either in, what do they call it?
Assembly.
Assembly, thank you. I'm losing my brain here. Assembly or even visit with some of the older kids. I think it might be lost on some of the younger kids, some of it, but
Right, but we thought we would do a one pager written, for that grade level that the teachers could use.
Yes.
To give some context around each name, like, because they're all sort of different ways to think about. Community and history.
it'll give the kids a chance to participate and generate some buzz.
Well,
So the committee voted unanimously for Donland Park, if I recall. They
Mhm.
thought that would be a good substitute for Colonial Park and recreation. So the 5 names, as I understand it, Julie? am I-
4.
4. So Madomic River Community Park, is that one off the list?
No, it's Madomic River Community Park,
Donland Park? Waldeboro Family Park?
No, it was Waldeboro Community Park.
Waldeboro Community Park, East Bank Park, and just Dawnland. I don't think the suggestion was Dawnland Park. It was just
Okay.
Dawnland.
It's a new amusement park to be located in
Really disappointed there's no roller coasters there.
I'd make the motion that we go with those 4 names.
I'll second it. Any more discussion? Only discussion I've had is we've been kicking this can. Can we get this done before
Done.
the kids get out of school
Yes,
this year?
definitely.
I know how you feel.
All in favor? Opposed? Thanks, Michael. Okay, agenda items for the next meeting. Well, we know we've got 2 public hearings.
2 public hearings. And
And we-
Karen Ann, we're having an update from our community navigation team. She'll provide us with numbers from last calendar year.
And we're going to discuss tax part property policy, right?
Correct. And we also have isn't that the parking?
Yeah, that's one of the 2.
One of the two hearings,
Ordinance?
traffic ordinance, yeah.
I just wanted to point out, I will recirculate the, parking ordinance for everybody to see, and we will put it up on the, website for people to have access to.
Okay, I did send out the other day.
Mhm.
A version with,
You did, there were just a few nits I had of your nits. One was that it should say state police when we're changing signals, not. There was another word there that wasn't state police, but technically it's.
yep, good.
Anything else on the agenda for next meeting you want to think of?
I think it's gonna be a long one.
You got a motion to adjourn?